Good morning. Thank you very much for those of you in the room. Thank you for being here. For those of you listening at home in front of your computers, we're glad you're online as well. I'm Kathy Newcomer, and I'm here to welcome you on behalf of the George Washington University, the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. We're a large graduate school here at GW, offering degrees in public administration, public policy, and environmental policy. And we are delighted many of our alumni, including some in this room, are in public service and working with grants management. Grants management is such an extremely important topic for anybody at any level of government to understand, since it affects such a very large amount of money, over $635 billion, as well as a lot of time and effort at all levels of government. So we're just delighted to have partnered with REI Systems to help sustain a community of practices in this arena, and also to sort of get ahead of the game on emerging topics that are of great importance to the community. And so my partner here, Jeff Myers from REI Systems, will introduce our wonderful speakers today. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kathy. So for those of you who haven't been to one of these before, the purpose of this really is to build community within grants management, to give you a chance to get to know each other, and if one of you has solved a problem already and others are facing that problem, to give you each other kind of a point of reference to help strengthen both the capability of the government around grant making as well as the grant recipient community, and to strengthen communications and connections. We try to have these events on a variety of topics, and let me actually just put in a brief plug now. On January 24th, we're going to have the results of our annual grants management survey, where more than 400 grant managers from around the country shared their perspective in response to the survey by George Washington University, the National Grants Management Association, as well as REI Systems. And as discussants for that set of survey results, we're going to have the lead grant manager for the National Institutes of Health, kind of from a competitive grant perspective, the lead for the Department of Housing and Urban Development from a kind of a block grant perspective, the Governor's Office of Grants Director from the state of Maryland for kind of a recipient and pass-through perspective, and then the Executive Director of the National Grants Management Association. So again, I think that'll be a very interesting conversation. As I'm doing some of the analysis right now, we're already finding really fascinating things. So for example, in the question of how much has your grant program's performance improved, what we're finding is that actually the state and local and nonprofits have indicated some substantial improvements in their grant program's performance. But actually almost the plurality, and not quite, but almost a majority of federal grant managers indicate they don't know or can't tell how much their grant program has improved. So we'll probably have a little bit of a discussion about that. And that brings to the topic kind of today's discussion, which is focused generally around OMB's recent memorandum on reducing grantee burden. And I'm hoping also will address the President's management agenda, CAP, or Cross-Agency Priority Goal 8, on grants-oriented accountability. And in fact, to present these topics, we're going to have a brief presentation, and then, a presentation, and then invite your questions so that there can be a little bit of a discussion and some raising of ideas. And for the presentation, we have two representatives of the Office of Management and Budget. Rhea Hubbard has actually been a grant manager, and in previous roles has served both at the National Institutes of Health and the Environmental Protection Agency, and is a senior policy analyst. And we have Jeannette Mandycz, who represents also Office of Management Budget. She's been tasked to work heavily and focus on leading CAP Goal 8 from OMB's perspective, and has worked as well in grants management and several other roles with the Social Security Administration, but started her life at started her professional life at Teach for America. So thank you very much both for joining us, and we'll leave it to you to kick off.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Are these on? I'm not. Are you guys picking us up? No.
The microphones are actually primarily for the online audience.
Oh, okay, great.
Just move it a little closer. So.
All right. So just let me know if you all can't hear me, but I'll try to just project my voice. So before I think we get into, I think primarily what we came to talk to you all about is the recent data standards that were released, the draft grants management data standards that are currently available for public comment. And this does relate back to M1824, which is the memorandum that OMB issued in September. But before we get into that, and also just the CAP goal in general, I was going to play a brief video from Margaret Weichert, who is the Deputy Director of Management, Office of Management Budget. So, let's see.
People don't always think about government, but when we need government services, we expect them to work. Government is and should be dedicated to the mission of serving our communities, protecting our safety, and growing our economy. Today, people can order a car for a ride to the airport with a smartphone, but farmers still have to drive hours to the nearest USDA office to apply in person for crop insurance. Our government must recognize that federal customers deserve an experience comparable to leading private sector practices. This is why we have relaunched the President's Management Agenda, the PMA. This agenda offers a vision that will not only change the way government serves its people, but will drive a deep-seated transformation that will last generations. Through our three key initiatives of IT modernization, data accountability and transparency, and federal workforce transformation, we believe the needed and profound change in government is possible. The President's Management Agenda embraces remarkable ingenuity and capabilities that prepare our government to meet the needs of the American people in the 21st century. You can learn more about the President's Management Agenda at omb.gov.
Great. So the reason we like to play that video is I think it gives a really high-level overview of kind of a lot of the focus of this administration when it comes to the President's Management Agenda and a lot of the cross-agency priority goals, which we'll briefly go over. So as Margaret outlined in that video, is that really what we're driving toward and a lot of the management initiatives at OMB right now are focused around IT modernization, data accountability and transparency, and people work and workforce of the future. And those are actually three overarching, what we're calling the gears to improve mission effectiveness, improve the service that we deliver to the American taxpayer, and really be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. So that's the overall theme that you'll see reflected in the President's Management Agenda, and you'll see that the grants cap goal, which is the results-oriented accountability for grants cap goal, which is cap goal 8, really does touch on all three of those gears as well. So just real briefly, I'll just go a little bit more in depth on some of the three gears. The first one is IT modernization, and there's actually a cap goal related to this as well. And the way Margaret describes it in the video and how you'll hear her speak about it, or what you'll see reflected in the PMA, is that really we think of this as kind of creating the platform for change that is really key to improving the mission, service, and stewardship that I just spoke of. Because as she mentioned, in the digital age that we're currently in, we expect a very seamless experience. As a consumer, we're able to order our car on our smartphone, as she described, but yet a farmer has to drive several hundred miles just to apply for crop insurance. So we really need to be improving the interaction that the federal taxpayer has, and really IT modernization is the underpinning of a lot of that. The next one is the data accountability and transparency. There's a lot of focus related to this, and obviously we're here to talk to you about the data standards, so we'll be touching a bit more on this. But this idea is that the federal government really has a tremendous amount of data at its disposal. We collect this data, we create data, and we also just have a ton of data that could actually be could be quite powerful. But we don't manage our data very well currently. There's a lot of challenges associated with data management. And really this is getting at how can we put the data governance in place to manage that data? How can we make it accessible to both private industry, even researchers, in the federal government? How can we better use that data and really kind of leverage it as a strategic asset? And also, how can we use that data to improve decision-making and accountability? So there's a lot of effort related to that. And then finally, the third gear is really the people workforce of the future. Many of you probably already saw in the news, Margaret Weichert is now also the acting director of OPM. So this is very near and dear to the DDM's heart. But really, this is getting at that we must enable senior leaders and frontline managers to align staff skills appropriately. Currently, it's really difficult to kind of get the right skills and expertise that you need in government to the right people, and this is really to help. It's really to help make sure that that's no longer a challenge. So there's a lot of focus on that as well. And I think, as Jeff mentioned, I think in the grants management community, we've been focusing a lot on like building the skills and needed for improved grants management. So that finally gets us to the cross-agency priority goals. So this is a very ambitious vision, obviously, and really to actually get some of this change in place, we have created a variety of cross-agency priority goals. There are 14 in total. And here you'll see that we highlighted the results-oriented accountability for grants cap, which is cap goal 8. But a lot of these cap goals are actually very related to one another, which will be reflected a bit in the other slide. And I should also mention that all the cap goals are available at performance.gov, and there are actually quarterly action plans posted quarterly to show updates and progress to each of the cap goals. And I'd also like to highlight here that there are some very direct linkages to the grants cap goal and the IT modernization cap goal, obviously, the data accountability and transparency, and also sharing quality services cap goal. So here you'll see, this slide is really to reflect, and you'll see that there's 11 cap goals here actually in this particular slide, and that's because three of the 14 cap goals are very mission specific, but these are kind of the more the like good government, government-wide cap goals. There's 11 here, and this is really to reflect that these cap goals are interconnected and interdependent. Like there's a lot of, and it kind of can actually be confusing to folks when you kind of describe, especially some of the complex governance associated with a lot of these cap goals. It's like, well, how does this relate to cap goal 5, cap goal 8, et cetera? But we're really trying to bring this all together because in the past, and I think this is part of the reason that we've had challenges in the past making some of these reforms, is that we were very siloed in our approach, and we're really trying to break down those silos this time and really recognize where, for instance, if we want to improve shared services for grants, then we need to really be working with the other lines of businesses that where grants management systems actually touch those other systems, for instance. Like there's a lot of work related to that. So we're really trying to break those silos and work together, and I think this is a really nice graphic that really shows how these cap goals really do touch on one another. So before turning it over to Jeannette, she's going to talk a little bit more about the results-oriented accountability for grants cap goal. I just kind of wanted to take a moment, and I know many of you who are in the grants management community will know all the challenges associated with grants, and why it is really important to really improve the current environment that we operate in. So before I kind of go into specific challenges by stakeholder community, I just also want to remind each other that we spend over $700 billion annually in grants. Actually, Kathy, I think used about $650 billion, but it's actually over $700 billion now. There's over 1,800 grant programs, over 30 agencies manage these grants, and over 40,000 recipients, so it's incredibly complex. And when I mentioned that there's 1,800 federal grant programs, that means there's approximately probably 1,800 related federal statutes associated with those programs, the underlying statutes that created those programs. So it's very complex, and I think that's partially why in the past it's been really challenging to tackle some of the challenges that we face as a community. And some of those challenges include, from an oversight community perspective, what we hear at OMB is that there's always a concern about weak internal controls, preventing funds mismanagement, fraud, improper payments, obviously. So we've always got the concerns with oversight community, they're very valid concerns. As I mentioned previously, one of the goals of the PMA is to improve the stewardship of federal taxpayer dollars. So this is very important, near and dear to our heart as well. But what happens sometimes when you have a lot of these, when you have a lot of focus on preventing oversight community concerns, is that you could also up the compliance related to the management of grants, right, or burden associated with it. And then from a recipient perspective, we hear a lot about burden, which I just mentioned, fragmentation. I think most recipients, so 40,000 of them, we estimate we have about 40,000 recipients. 35,000 of those recipients submit single audits, which means they expend over 750,000 annually. So most of them actually receive funds from multiple federal awarding agencies and multiple programs. So there's a lot of fragmentation and burden associated with all the different requirements associated with those different programs. Data standards associated with a lot of the reporting requirements, et cetera. So there's a lot of challenges, and there's also a lot of conflicting guidance. From a federal agency perspective, there's really a need for improved coordination across the lines of businesses, which is something that we've been working really hard to related to this CAP goal. We have, as I mentioned earlier, and this is related to one of the gears that I mentioned, is that we have a lot of data. The quality of it isn't always as great as we'd like it to be, and it's really hard to actually access it and use it to support data analytics. And we also have a very unstandardized business process currently. So that's what you hear a lot from the federal awarding agencies. So to tackle some of these challenges, we've come up with the CAP goal, and at this point I'll turn it over to Jeannette, and we'll kind of we'll try to make this as much of a discussion as we can as we go through the presentation. But I'll go ahead and let Jeannette talk a bit more about the CAP goal.
Sure. So rather than reading you what's set out here in this slide, I'll give you a bit of an example. I began my career, as Jeff mentioned, as a teacher, and in the process of those years teaching, I worked with East Coast Migrant Head Start. And what I remember about that experience with East Coast Migrant Head Start was doing a lot of counting little heads, counting milk boxes, counting how many diapers needed to be refilled at the end of the day, and then jotting all of that down on pieces of paper, which I then handed to an admin who put them in a spreadsheet, who sent them to one grants management office, and then on to the state, and then back to USDA. So obviously that's a very burdensome process, and really the goal that we're trying to get to here with the CAP goal is to minimize burden and also create data that's useful. I never really understood why we needed to know which milk boxes were used, how many chocolate, how many plain, like that never made any sense to me. So we're looking to get to a point where we have data that is really truly useful and tells us something about how our money was spent, what was achieved. And one of the things that we're going to get to in a moment is that foundational piece of standardization of data, which is one of the things that we're working on now. So in terms of the CAP goal overall, we're looking at this point at three strategies to sort of put us on the path to that sort of more seamless environment and less burdensome environment. The first one is standardizing data. As many of you may know, we have released an FRN with some draft data standards for grants, 426 baseline terms that basically at this point what we're looking for is feedback from all folks who are involved in the grants making process, trying to get to a point where we are able to speak a common language and where we're able to create data that makes sense to everyone. We're also looking at a couple of other areas, developing some digital tools to manage risk, again, to make sure that the money is spent well and that we are getting to the results that were intended by the award. And finally, coming back to risk-based performance management, again, that ties into the digital tools that will give us the ability to sort of really gauge how the money is being spent. Okay, and Rhea is going to talk a bit about how we develop those data standards.
So as Jeannette mentioned, we did just recently release those draft data standards, and I just wanted to briefly talk a bit about how we develop those draft data standards. So really this work actually began back in the fall of 2016. Actually, it's kind of been in process for quite a while. And that was when the federal grants management community internally, so it's been long recognized that we need to standardize our business process, that we have a problem with data standardization. There's been a lot of activity related to this. Obviously, there was FFATA and then Data Act, and there was the Data Act Section 5 pilot report, which recommended further standardization of our data. So there's been a lot of momentum and energy behind this because it really has been a long-standing problem. So back in the fall of 2016, the federal grants management community, and this is it was an interagency work group, actually began to develop outcome-focused business capabilities to help you, essentially it looked at the capabilities you need to manage an award through the federal award lifecycle. And to do this, we use the Federal Integrated Business Framework, which is something that, this is an approach that other lines of businesses are using across the federal government currently. That includes, and you'll see them right there, is the financial management community, human capital, procurement, and grants and travel. We're all working on this in tandem. So we're all taking this kind of very methodical approach to identifying what capabilities we actually need as a community to execute our awards from a grants management perspective. So what we did is we started in fall 2016, focused on the outcomes-focused capabilities. You don't need to know all the nuances associated with the FIBIT, but that's essentially where the data standards came from. So once we finished those business capabilities, we took a next step and said, okay, what is the data that you need to complete these capabilities? Like, what is the data that you need? We purposely didn't we didn't take the approach when we drafted the data standards. It looked at all the data that we currently collect. Like, we didn't take that approach. It was, okay, what do we actually need? Like, let's take a step back. Let's not compare, let's not compare what's in your existing system or what's currently your information collection request. Let's take a step back and say, okay, what data do you actually need to complete the award lifecycle? So that's where the draft data standards actually came from. We did refer to a lot of the standard collections that we currently have, like the SF424 series, which is the grant application series, and some other data that grants.gov available, and obviously Cedar Library was considered as a resource as well, but really did just take more of a step back and say, okay, what is it that you need to manage the awards? So that's where the draft data standards actually came from. And if you want to see the business capabilities associated with those draft data standards, they're actually available online. They've been available for some time now, and they're at ussm.gov/FIBF. So I can mention that again later. If you guys didn't catch that link, you can just ask me about it later. But that's where you can actually find the business capabilities that the draft data standards were based on. And I also just wanted to mention that this work, it included, I believe, over 50 participants from federal awarding agencies, and representatives from 18 of the agencies. So we had quite a large group that really collaborated on this. And this group, currently they're out there as draft right now. We're receiving public feedback. Once we receive that feedback, they're going to be getting back together and reconciling that and beginning the finalization process of finalizing those data standards. Huh?
When is feedback due?
January
the
15th, which we're going to be getting at a bit. So I just wanted to mention that because I think just to provide context of where those draft data standards actually came from. And then I think I'm going to pass it over to Jeannette to maybe we can just have more of a discussion of what the benefits are of data standardization. So.
Sure. So this graphic that you're looking at right now is sort of designed to give you a sense of where we would like to go. So we'd like to get to a point where we have data that actually tells us whether or not the money that was spent worked. Did we get what we intended to get when the grant was made? So I guess kind of what we're hoping to get from you all, since you work in this area every day and see this, is a sense of whether or not what the benefits of using these types of indicators could be, and whether or not we have a complete picture here to get some thoughts. I know it's early in the morning. I hope everyone's had some coffee.
Yeah, so I think what we're trying to get at is I think previously discussed about some of those challenges we face as a community. So if we can get some discussion about, okay, what is the benefit of actually standardizing this data? How would it solve a lot of those challenges that we just discussed? And also just any thoughts on what this future framework, how beneficial this future framework might be? So anyone?
I just have one question.
Yeah.
In regards to award selection initiatives, does that also include pre-award? So
Yeah, so we couldn't
also
list all of the functions activities on one easy graphic, but yes. And actually, if you go back to, I mentioned the business capabilities earlier. If you go back, there's actually, there's 15 functions, very specific functions, and pre-award is one of them.
Okay.
But this, for purposes of the slide, I think we just kind of summarized it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Or if anyone's encountered any bumps where the lack of standardized data has created a problem?
That might be easier. Yes.
Sure.
I think it would be beneficial. I work with USDA with the grants at NIFA, but I've also worked at several other grant-making agencies, and if they would share information, financial reporting, and technical the technical assistance, final reports, if they could share more of the information with other agencies as past performance, I think it would be beneficial to everyone involved in the process. The agencies can help the grantees from the technical assistance perspective, and also the new grantor would have more information about who they're awarding to.
Yeah, so I think that that was perfect because that's a lot of the focus of the CAP goal right now, actually. So Jeannette mentioned earlier that strategy 2 was digital tools to manage risk, and a piece of that is that we think that there is a tremendous opportunity to share data across federal awarding agencies, and there's a particular focus on the single audit resolution process, because it doesn't really make sense that we're not sharing our management decisions with one another and it's not easily accessible. So like that is something that we're proactively pursuing, is even there's might be a potential to prototype such a tool and actually use some of that data and put data analytics on it, not only from the single audit but from other sources to do more of a government-wide risk assessment of recipients. And you can see how this would be a tremendous reduction in burden for agencies and also from the recipient community itself, because currently the current environment is that you're right. I think what you're kind of alluding to is, for instance, Department of Labor have done some technical assistance to a small nonprofit, and they don't even know that EPA was just there last week, or like stuff like there's a tremendous opportunity to it's burdensome for recipients for everyone to be asking them the same questions or reviewing the same information. So we do think there's a tremendous opportunity there to really take a more government-wide approach to that. So that's something we're actively pursuing.
Yes, in addition, if they would be able to share the compliance review results, because we perform site visits and we have reports. And I think if other agencies had access to those reports, then they can make better decisions when making awards.
Right. And I think our premise is that in order to have like a future tool or something like that, then we think that data standards is really foundational to that. So is there any other thoughts? Yes,
I
Jerry.
just kind of had a basic question. So far in the comments that you have gotten, have you had a chance to review them? Is there any kind of overarching thing that you're seeing, and is there any data element that seems to be getting a lot of interest as far as, differences of opinion on what that data element really means?
I have not looked carefully recently. Have you, Jeannette?
The last time that I looked, I hadn't noticed any sort of real trends. But that said, it is a bit early in the process still. We're not quite a month in, so we're very hopeful that we'll see some more traffic, and we really hope that you all in the room will help us to sort of let people know that the data standards are there, and we're looking for feedback from all stages of the grant making process to really see where we may have some issues, things that we need to tweak, and where we may have gotten it right.
So I would point out three things. One is from the government's perspective, from the federal government's perspective, your suggestion of, well, we can do better risk management and perhaps better technical assistance seems to be the most powerful. From the other side, though, from the recipient's perspective, there are kind of a couple of things I've heard pretty frequently, which is, we have this set of financial data or other data, and we get grants from a couple of different federal agencies, and we have to kind of twist it in a different way to report to each. We really hope data standards will mean we don't have to twist it, but that also then kind of leaves the next step. Well, even if you don't have to twist it a different way, you still have to report to the 2 or 3 different agencies. And so what kind of the recipients are hinting at is for the federal government maybe to help figure out where or what types of of recipients most frequently receive grants from multiple federal sources. And then for someone, perhaps OMB, to work with those multiple federal sources and say, for example, USDA and Department of Commerce, you have an overlap of recipients in 372 cases. Let's see whether or not, instead of having them even report the same data using standards, which is much better than different data, let's see maybe whether or not you can actually just share the data and have them only report it once instead of reporting it separately to each of you.
Right.
So to kind of take that last step to reduce burden of saying, well, now we've got standards, but can we then eliminate the repetitive requests for the same data?
Right, so I think in that's the long-term vision, right? And we hear that a lot at OMB all the time. You know, we're out meeting with recipients. They know us. They're always telling us what their challenges are. And this goes back to the Data Act Section 5 pilot as well. I think that is part of the long-term vision, and I think that's why it's related to the sharing quality services cap goal. This cap goal is because you know, you almost have to consolidate them. You have to do it on both ends, right? In order to like improve the user experience of the recipient, they have less systems to interact with. We also need to do a better job internally of all the number of grants management systems we have internally to manage grants across the federal space. And again, that's why we think data standards and all those business capabilities we developed are really key, because we need a government-wide consensus of like, what is it, the core data standards that we need as a federal government to manage grants. And that's what we're trying to get at. I think that's part of the long-term vision. I think part of the reason you hear that the focus initially is on the digital tools to manage risk is because the single audit is actually we're kind of in a unique position with single audit, because the receipt of that is already centralized, right? Mm-hmm. And we already know that there's a pressing need to there's not really an existing tool that solves that problem right now, as opposed to when you start trying to change all the agency-specific grants management systems. It's very challenging because they have a lot of legacy systems and they can't make the switch right away. But that's why I think the immediate near-term focus is on kind of that piece. But it is part of the long-term vision to kind of consolidate and streamline systems, which is reflected in M1824. That is mentioned in M1824. Any other thoughts before we kind of move on? There will be an opportunity for questions later as well. Yes.
I would say one of the positive experiences I've had has been with FAPUS in terms of it makes it very clear whom I can contact at another agency, and I hope that model is something that's being looked at, because it really, as compared to the single audit, federal audit clearinghouse, where you can find out there's a DOE finding and then just be down email corridors for weeks and weeks and weeks. FAPUS really helps connect to that agency so that you can get your answers in a rapid amount of time.
And that's a really good suggestion. I think we'll keep that in mind as we pursue this work. And I think I also wanted to mention part of the reason we're also focusing so much on the digital tools to help manage risk piece as well, because the thought is once you're able to appropriately assess a recipient's risk, and for instance, if you had determined whether they're low risk or not, and then you kind of couple that with some of the other efforts related to the CAP goal, which we're looking at better performance management practices and things like that. If an agency knows that a recipient's low risk, and we also have a pretty good idea how they're performing, we have good metrics, or we know that they have good performance management practices in place. We know the answer to the question that Jeff just mentioned, how well a recipient is actually performing in the programmatic outcomes of the award. You could actually say, okay, you're low risk, we know we have a pretty good handle on your performance. We could probably start alleviating some of those other burdensome compliance requirements associated with a lot of the uniform guidance and all those other requirements, because it's kind of like we're taking a risk-based approach to the management of that award. We know you're performing well, we know you're low risk, so we're going to alleviate some of the burden. We're going to modify your terms and conditions to allow more flexibility under this award.
We have a question from Ruth Gonzalez from NSF, who's watching online. She says there are a number of fields that include the word code in their name, while the proposed domain values are character values. I'd suggest reserving the term code for alphanumeric fields that have accompanying descriptive fields. Is there an intent to add descriptive fields for all the code data elements?
Yeah, so that's great. So please submit your comments on the GitHub page, Ruth. And also for federal agencies, I just want to mention that there is an opportunity as part of this interagency work group to actually reconcile a lot of these comments as well. So there is an opportunity beyond the public comment period to help reconcile some of these comments. I think the way we're viewing it is what we have out there right now is kind of like version 1 of the draft data standards, right? There would be subsequent versions which perhaps more details. We have heard those type of comments already from others as well.
And so really what we're looking to do here is to get to a point where we have a common language that everyone is using, so there's complete and total shared understanding of what these concepts mean. However, in order to get to that point, we really need the feedback to tune them up. So please comment, take a look, see what's relevant to you. Don't think, please, that each and every data standard is going to apply to each and every program or agency. What this is really intended to do is to be a foundational menu from which we can get to a point where we are able to develop technology solutions to make reporting less burdensome and useful, and more useful.
So a moment ago, I kind of wore the hat of the recipient. Now let me switch to the hat of kind of the consultant. When you talk about kind of having a risk evaluation, that's kind of saying, well, how can we avoid risk? It's easier to figure out where the risk is when we have this apples to apples data using the standards. So my question is, if we flip that on its head, perhaps it's also easier to identify those grant programs who are doing really well.
Right.
And have adopted some sort of fantastic practice that should be shared. So my question is there kind of a thought, just a parallel to the kind of, well, let's identify this risk capability to let's identify this, award-winning or best practice or lesson learned sort of thing that we could then share. These 5 agencies or 5 programs or 5 practices are really worth considering because they've been really successful when we look at the apples to apples data.
Yeah, so we didn't speak specifically to that, but there recently, and I think actually this might be reflected in another, this upcoming slide, is that we are currently, is it in there? I'm not sure. But no, it's not in here, but it is in the action. If you go to performance.gov, it's the capital action plan deck. It mentions that we actually currently are surveying federal awarding agencies for their best practices and asking those type of questions like, how well is your performance management? Like, do you have a system currently to measure your performance? Do you even have performance metrics in place for this program? We're asking for best practices right now, and we hope to analyze those results and say, okay, what programs might be ripe for piloting opportunities. So we are kind of doing that on the separate end. We are looking into that.
My piece of feedback as a consultant who is slightly jaded is lots of different folks will tell you that they have a best practice because it's the best they've known and they really like it. And when you use the evidence, sometimes the evidence kind of confirms that that's a best practice, but sometimes it finds things that you never thought to look at. And the person managing it didn't realize it was a best practice, but with apples to apples data, it really stands out. So my advice is, don't just listen to what people tell you is a best practice, look for it in the data.
Right, well, we are OMB, so we're gonna look for it in the data.
The standardized data will make that easier.
Yes, we will, yes. We're familiar with that practice as well, I'd say, Jeff. But yeah, we ask them very specific pointed questions to really back up their assertion that they're doing good performance management practices. But so I don't know if we want to go, this has been a really great discussion. I don't know if we want to go ahead and go through the rest of our slides and then kind of have a little bit more discussion later on.
Sure, so we just want to let you know a few of the things that we've done, and I'll highlight a couple. Obviously, the big one is the data standards have been released. So another shameless plug, please read the data standards. Please comment, please reply to comments from other commenters to let us know how their comments would affect your lines of business as well. That will also be extremely useful to us. So the data elements are out there. Please take a look. Some of the other things that we've done, we've issued M1824, Strategies to Reduce Grant Recipient Reporting Burden, which we'll touch on a bit more in a moment. But that really both reiterates the goals of Capital 8 and sets out some items going forward, including the fact that OMB will be issuing a readiness assessment to sort of gauge where agencies are. We're expecting that to be coming out in the next few weeks. And from there, basically what we're going to be asking is that agencies let us know where you are in your process by April the 30th to see sort of how ready agencies are to both adopt data standards and where your current systems are in that process. And then looking forward, so one of the things obviously that we're doing now is soliciting some feedback. We're going to be analyzing that feedback and then looking at how we need to update the draft data standards in response to that feedback. So again, very, very important. That readiness assessment is coming in the next few weeks. We're going to be looking for, once we have both the readiness assessments and have had the opportunity to analyze data, we're going to be looking for opportunities to begin to sort of roll them out and see where we may be able to put in place a tool to begin to use some standardized data. And similarly in the audit and risk management areas. And Rhea was going to talk a bit about another initiative, the Opportunity Project.
Yeah, so I just wanted to briefly mention that something that we're also doing, and this is something that CAPGOAL 2 is focusing a lot on as well, is again, getting back to those gears, those 2 gears, so that gear with data accountability and transparency is part of that CAPGOAL, and also to support the CAPGOAL 8, results-oriented accountability for grants. We've been partnering with the Opportunity Project, and I know REI Systems, I think you guys have been engaged as well, and this really is just, it's an opportunity for the government to engage with private industry to come up with some prototyping or digital tools that is beneficial to the public, and it's kind of it's a 12-week sprint. What happens is that we partner with technology teams and they're able to get access to federal data stewards and really kind of work together collaboratively to come up with some helpful tools for the public. So currently we have 2 challenges related to grants that are out there, and one is to develop tools that expand on existing systems to help grant recipients manage the entire grants management lifecycle, and I think that's getting at a lot of the challenges that we hear from the recipient community, that it's really hard to get at the access to the data that they need, et cetera. And then the other challenge is develop public-facing tools that link federal spending and performance. Again, this gets to the transparency aspect of CAPGOAL 8 and also our CAPGOAL as well, that we'd really like to better link the actual spending, which obviously a large portion of federal spending goes out through grants, to performance. So this just is an example of like things that folks are working on, where they're leveraging existing federal government open data to create some digital tools. And yes, I see a question.
So when you say you're building tools public facing, how would that be different from usaspending.gov?
No, so I'm sorry, so you mean the challenge to link federal spending and performance?
Right.
Well, actually the Treasury team is actively engaged in that one, and I think the thought is it could in the future be reflected on usaspending.gov. So it's not meant to be like a separate or repetitive or, yes, go ahead.
Since actually REI Systems is involved in that, the answer is the Opportunity Project tool draws data from USA Spending for the spend. USA Spending, however, does not include any performance grant outcome results.
That's true.
In fact, USA Spending actually does not include any sort of results other than money was dispersed to the recipient X. So the purpose is with 3 pilot programs to say, here is a mashup between spend data via grants and outcome reports data, typically both performance and of outputs as well as some outcomes.
Yeah, so thanks, Jeff. That's right. It's using the open data that's available in USA Spending and other open data that may be available and kind of meshing them together, right? All right, and then I think I'm going to turn over briefly to Jeannette to talk a little bit more about M1824, which I think we've talked about some already, but
sure. So just to sort of emphasize, M1824 Strategies to Reduce Grant Recipient Reporting Burden was released, I believe, in August or early September, and essentially it sets out again some of the primary goals of the CAPGOAL and sort of tees up our next steps in that we're going to have a readiness assessment that's going to be released shortly. And basically what we're going to be asking agencies to do is please tell us where you are in your process. Let us know how your systems are working, where you are in sort of the ability to either migrate current system data to a shared service or just to adopt data standards. And those questions will be set out in such a way that, you know, what we're hoping is to get data back from you all that lets us know who might be ready to adopt a shared solution and move on to those next steps in this sort of new environment that we're envisioning. And that's kind of where we are with M1824. And so moving right along, again, data standards, I can't emphasize enough how much we need your feedback. You all know your programs, you know what will work, you know what won't. Please tell us so that we can provide some solutions that are a fit for what your agencies do. So that, again, that comment period will be open until January 15th. There is an online portal through which you can make those comments. You know, please, I'm the contact in the Federal Register notice. Please reach out to me and let me know if you have any questions about how to use that portal. In addition, this Thursday we'll be having the last of 3 office hours sessions. It's going to be held in a virtual format, a webinar, between 4 and 5 p.m. on Thursday afternoon. And that is available on grantsfeedback.gov, the contact information in order to get into that webinar. So we're also, at this point at OMB, looking at a stakeholder engagement plan. We want to make sure that we're involving everyone. And that we've reached out to stakeholders. We're hoping that everyone here can help us make those connections and reach out to the folks that you know to let them know the data standards are there, and the other, obviously, progress that we've made, what's going on, so that we can bring people into our community of practice and that we can get feedback from everyone at every level of the grants making process. Okay. Okay, and again, for more information about our CAP goal, we've got our website up here. Please join the listserv so that if you have not already, so that we can make sure that you're in the loop with new things going on. Let us know if there are other stakeholders we should be reaching out to. And please again stay in touch with us as going forward to let us know where we may be missing some things. We're very open to that. We want to make sure that we're getting that feedback from you all and building that into the process.
So it's now time for my shameless plug, but please do join the community of practice that we've created at digital.gov. We do think that there are a lot more folks who could join. We know that, there's over 40,000 recipients, as I just mentioned, and I see a lot of folks at different events. So please do join the community of practice. I think right now it's currently just kind of more of a listserv format where we push emails or information to folks. But I think in the future we'd like to have more of a collaborative actual community of practice where maybe you have different events and things like that. We're thinking through that as part of our stakeholder engagement. But please join to stay informed of the latest and greatest. And I should mention that Brett Fishman is here, she's with the Office of Management Budget as well. She's actually the lead on the stakeholder engagement. So I know that's something that Brett's very interested in hearing from you all, like the best ways to engage. And then, sorry to interrupt you, Jeannette.
I think, that's most of what we had. Again, stay up to date on PMA at performance.gov. There's a Twitter handle associated with that, and also the CFO Council has a website. And the Opportunity Project is opportunity.census.gov. That's available as well. So I think that's the bulk of what we wanted to put forward, but we're really interested in getting any questions that you have and some thoughts. Any thoughts or points for discussion?
Yes.
I work for USDA as well, and I know there are issues with the farmers, and I appreciate you all bringing that up. But the biggest thing, or one of the biggest things that we're faced with, is duplicate projects. So let's say there's outreach grants for USDA for those farmers. Well, there may be another grant that's doing something similar, and someone will give me a call and say, hey, you gave a grant and they already have one. to do the same thing. So I was wondering if there will be something in place with this new cap that may have data elements that would prevent the duplicate grants.
That's certainly something that we would like to build in, and we really encourage you, please put that in writing. So also, we'd be interested in knowing where the other agencies are that are seeing that issue, so that that can be something that's built into systems that are going to be under development to use the data standards.
And it may be the grants itself, maybe it's the intent of the grant that may be the duplicate effort between different agencies. So.
The purpose of the program is something that we want to look into.
Yeah, so I think the data standards and all the business capability work and everything that we did over really the past 2.5 years almost, I think that will get at it, because I think it's when we start having more shared service solutions as a grants management community, and we have better access to one another's data. I think your USDA colleague mentioned previously how it's really frustrating that you can't get access to what another agency did with compliance reviews. So I think in this future award environment, and it's a long-term vision, it's not something we're going to get to tomorrow, it should be easier to see what other agencies are doing in this space. It should be easier to see what grants you have existing with the federal recipient. There's obviously usaspending.gov where you can see what existing awards went out and what the general description is of that award, but I think what we're hearing is that we actually need a lot more access to some of that internal government. What is currently internal doesn't mean it can't be external in the future. I don't think there's, but we need to be able to share information better across the federal space. Yeah. Go ahead.
And I'll include this in your serve in writing. It will also be helpful if we can share information internally for the larger agencies within components, the different components. They have programs, and if they can share some of the data from those programs, I think it will be helpful as well. You'll have a program in one office, and you have another department, and you may be having the same compliance issues, and because you don't share the data, it's hard to help the grantee to remediate the issues.
Right. So often we say between agencies, but really with some of those really large agencies like HHS, USDA, Department of Transportation, like some of those HUD is another one. I'm probably not naming them all, but like some of those really large agencies with those many components that award different grants. You're right. It can be a challenge internally within an agency as well.
I know in your Federal Register notice about the comments, you basically said name some that are missing, or but are there any specific details that commenters could add that would really be helpful for you guys when you're assessing them?
I can't. I know there were some instructions on the Excel spreadsheet that came along, like to some questions to think of as you're reviewing the data standards, and I don't think. Otherwise, I mean, Jeannette, I don't know if there's anything specific.
One of the primary things is just to identify properly the elements, and identify yourself. That way, we're able to circle back if we need to fill in some gaps.
Yeah. So. I think because we haven't done this before, Jared, like it's kind of hard to answer that question almost, because we're not even really sure what type of feedback we're going to get back. I think we're kind of like, we're kind of in that, it's the first time we've released the data standards, so if we did this in the future, perhaps we'd have a better idea of like what is the most helpful type of feedback to provide back. Yeah.
I like this, or I don't like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So please elaborate. Don't just say I like this and I don't like this. I think just provide more context would be helpful, definitely. Yeah.
And please bear in mind, every element does not apply to every agency and program. So, dial down on the ones that do apply to your area.
Right.
Yeah, I was trying to follow up on her comment here, Kenya's comment about duplicate recipients. I know that we deal in my agency with very small disaster recovery grants, and the Office of Inspector General and the different ones across agencies are trying to retroactively identify duplicate recipients, and it's a burden upon us because they're doing this retroactively. So, and these are mostly to individuals. So if there is some sort of way, and I will be going to comment on this because that is something I think that, I guess, are you engaging the Office of Inspector Generals across agencies on your comments and things?
We just met with Siggy yesterday, actually, on the draft data standards. And Siggy is the chief inspector. I'm probably going to get the acronym wrong, but it's essentially the Council of the Inspector Generals. And we did meet with them, and they have they are going to be commenting on the draft data standards and working just more broadly on the cap goal with us, because we do think that is a key relationship that we need to foster, and we really need their feedback. Yeah.
And CNR's like, because it's a sub-reporting system that goes to states most of the time, so that personal identification information or whatever this is like stored within the states, and they have no way to report that.
Right, yeah.
And so then we're getting to the PII thing where all of a sudden we have it and giving it to the Inspector General. So we have sensitive data now that we really don't need to, that the states are charged with holding.
Yeah.
And one other comment while I have the floor. There was a comment earlier about the single audit in FAPIS, I mean the Federal Audit Clearinghouse in FAPIS. I think that it would be really useful if the majority of my time with the risk assessment process is going to all the various things and trying to get the FAPIS data, the stuff from the Federal Audit Clearinghouse for about 300 recipients at a time.
Right.
So it's getting it within that window is not reasonable. And if there's a way to do some sort of batch request like I can do with the Federal Audit Clearinghouse with 10 at a time and get the data all at once, that would be extremely helpful to reduce our workload, the federal agency.
One of the things I'm hearing kind of as maybe a use case, which is kind of the broader example of a specific comment or two here, is USA spending, and I presume some sort of similar thing perhaps for grants, essentially says what's happened in the past, where have we awarded money, where have we spent it, who has received it, how much. And what I hear it being asked is, well, what about the future? And in the procurement world, it's kind of an advanced procurement plan that says these are the things we plan to buy next year, 2 years, 4 years, 5 years from now. Usually they don't say what vendor they're going to come from, but it sounds like for grants, you're kind of saying, it would be really helpful to have some of those advanced plans for grants, at least for a program area or perhaps even a geography, and in some cases perhaps for a specific anticipated grantee, because it seems to me like that's the only way that you could then find out, well, will there be duplication of a grantee in the future? And it's one thing if one's received it in the past and we're going to duplicate that in the future. It's another thing if two different bureaus or two different agencies are both going to make an award in the future to the same grantee. So my question to a certain extent to all of you and to you as well is, would the federal awarding community be interested, willing, and able to provide some future information? And would that make sense potentially to include in parallel with the kind of the retroactive information around which I think most of the data standards kind of address? So anybody, would you be willing to provide kind of an advanced plan for your grant awards at any level of detail?
I think that's hard to provide advanced plans for our, right? Because if they're competitive or yeah, I mean, obviously the funding opportunity announcements are available at grants.gov, so in that way you can plan what is in the pike. And then I think something that grants.gov has been working on and some other agencies might be interested in this tool as well is something called forecast, where they're kind of forecasting what announcements they think are down the pike. So that's kind of what we've been doing in the planning stage, but I think it's kind of tricky to, I don't know if it's the same as it is in procurement, but.
Same with procurement, I think you can see what RFPs are out there, but you can't predict who's going to win. That would be illegal.
Sure. Well, in some cases that's true for grants, and others it's not, because in fact, state block grant recipients, they're going to be receiving in the future too.
That's true.
Right.
So not all, but some.
Well, and I think, and keep in mind, and I think this was mentioned in a comment earlier, and I'm sorry, I don't remember your name, but a lot of it is the statutory, it's the statute, it's a duplicative program essentially. It's not sometimes it's statutory framework that I mentioned earlier, there's over 1,800 federal grant programs. A lot of them have very specific statutory authorizing statutes. And what's interesting is sometimes something that looks very duplicative in nature, like a program, if you actually look at what's allowed to spend under that award, it is slightly different. I think what we hear a lot from recipients is kind of So I think that's interesting from the federal agency perspective. Sometimes we're thinking of duplication. Are we spending this money twice for the same purpose? What we hear from a recipient perspective is, it's really frustrating to have these similar grant programs, and I can't actually use the money for what I need it to use it for, because there's very specific rules associated with each of those grants. So they're like, how can we make these more complementary actually? We recognize that there's kind of similarities to what the purpose of these awards are, but we can't even really we can't complement the awards. Yeah. Go ahead.
This is Jeannette again. This is writing on your last comment. It may be helpful if you standardize the allowable cost and if there's more clarity with allowable costs to help the grantees, because I think from what I can see at the different agencies and throughout programs, grantees get confused about which allowable costs, which agency has certain types of allowable costs. So they'll say, well, I can spend this in this program, but I can't spend it in the other program, and it's the same, line of business. So I think if from the O&B level, if you all could give them a little more clarity on the allowable costs, it would be helpful.
So O&B has standardized the allowable costs. The allowable costs are standardized in 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance. I think what's tricky is those underlying statutory requirements that sometimes agencies interpret. This is another thing. Sometimes they'll say it's based in statute, but it may not, if you actually do some investigation, it may not always be based exactly in statute. So I think that's something we always struggle with. But sometimes it is true. Sometimes in a statute, you cannot spend the funds for a certain purpose. And we're kind of unless you change the underlying authority, your kind of hands are tied there. But I do agree that agencies and need to maybe do a better job of if there are flexibilities to make that clearer to the recipient community.
I guess it is the interpretation. That's what we get. And, it's the legal interpretation at each agency.
Yeah.
And what the allowable costs are.
Yeah.
I think it would be helpful to have some rationale at a program level, at least explain why you don't have those costs.
Yeah.
Our program, it's just because we've always done it that way. And
Right.
They can really explain it, and they point to the statute, but then when you investigate, it's really not in the statute.
Yeah.
But
So, what's interesting, I think it's kind of it's related to this discussion, is that was a lot of the challenge. So remember, this group has been working together for over 2 years now. A lot of the initial growing pains, or how you want to, we'd say, agency would say, well, we can't call it that because it's in our statute, or we can't do that capability because that's our program for programmatic statutory reasons. But then when you investigated and looked at the underlying authoritative references, it wasn't always the case. So I think that was what was really great about this exercise, is that we did always try to go back to those authoritative references to say, okay, is it true that there is a statutory or regulatory limitation that prevents you from adopting this data standard or this business capability, et cetera. So we did actually do that really hard work of actually going back and looking. In some cases it's true, with certain programs it is, yeah. Go ahead.
So I think it's great that these standards actually have been laid down and sort of it's open for commenting period and so on. But as you sort of look forward, 12 months from now, right? Obviously, I think these standards will only be useful if there is adoption across the government.
Mm-hmm.
So what does progress look like for you, 12 months from now, and what are some of the asks from agencies in terms of how they can go about adopting these standards?
Yeah, so I think that's where M1824 jumps in, is that we're asking agencies to start planning for the adoption of these standards, and they'll be submitting those plans to O&B, and I think we'll have a better idea of what the challenges are then. Obviously, there'll be future implications of agencies may have to modify their existing information collection requests to adopt these standards. I can't say what success looks like a year from now. I think it's going to be incremental. I think we'll be in a much better position. So we have the plans are due in April. We also have the readiness assessment that's happening as well. I think we'll be much better positioned to actually, scope out what those associated milestones should be for adoption of the standards. Yeah.
I think one comment from my side is that I feel like the single audit report I think is a great sort of example of a process that people are able to sort of converge on, right? Because you only support one report for your organization, right? And so, but I think it also sort of masks the challenge of adopting these standards, which is like, at the program specific level, at the grant level, which is where the variations start to occur. They typically are not really brought out in the single audit report because it's an organizational report. So it will be great if OMB is able to identify like, one or two business processes which are really burdensome and sort of like, rally the government to sort of standardize them. For example, like, we look at, as part of our support of the state government agencies, we know that, payment requests, right, is very burdensome for grantees because, typically, the states may have to submit like 2 or 3 payment requests per week actually to get paid. But, so picking the right process that really, gives the benefit and the ROI also on the state side or the grantee side would be really useful. So if you are able to identify a process and sort of ask everyone, okay, hey, in the next 12 months, next 18 months, this is the process we're going to solve, I think it will make a very measurable difference across the community. So.
May I ask, kind of follow that on, have there been structured opportunities where recipients of grants, presumably some states, maybe some nonprofits, have said, here's the burden that's kind of most concerning to us, and then you can help think about ways to use the data standards to relieve that particular burden? And part of the reason I ask is because it may not just be the data standards, but it may, as Subhash suggests, be how are they implemented and how quickly and how much change is needed to implement them on behalf of the federal awardees. And the last big one, which is, are they being implemented by different federal agencies in a way that kind of interacts with each other to reduce burden? I fear that there are some places where if the federal agencies don't kind of collaborate, the burden actually may not get reduced.
Right. And that's where the data standards come in. I mean, really that is meant to be the foundation of creating that sort of common language so that everyone begins on the same page. And that's why the data standards are so important.
Yeah, and I think like there hasn't been like a formal concerted effort to ask. We do meet with the states, we do meet with the recipient community, so we do hear a lot of these pain points. Just mentioned payment, we hear about payment a lot, for instance. But there has been no like methodical concerted effort to ask. One, we're limited in what we can ask actually, because of the Paperwork Reduction Act. But we do go out, we do have forums to hear back from the recipient community, we do meet with them. And I think you're right that like, we don't want to be in a position where we're actually introducing burden, right? If agencies aren't working together. So we do want to get at that.
So yeah. One of the things I've observed, I think you've kind of hit two of the biggest pieces of burden. You take first the single audit. All of a sudden, wow! Now instead of having to do 12 different audits with 12 different grantor agencies, I as a recipient now get to do one. That's great. The ability to say, well, let's kind of grab the information from sam.gov. So I only have to put in all my identifying information once,
right,
instead of, again, multiple times. So that's great. But that then kind of leads me to wonder, are there a kind of another prioritized set of kind of burdens that we could say, well, let's tackle these next. And maybe the first one, OMB could do alone, and maybe the second one requires HHS and Treasury to work together, and maybe the third one requires 6 different agencies. I guess my question is just, I don't know what kind of those prioritized burden reduction tactics might be, and I'm curious if anyone does.
I mean, I think that's where we're interested in hearing from the recipient community to hear what those priorities are. I do think we hear a lot of like we hear a lot of this informally, right? On what the priority should be. So I think from a federal agency perspective, we kind of have an idea of where the opportunities lie. Like payment is one, pre-award. It's kind of easier at the 2 back ends of the grants management process to standardize, and where there's opportunity, there's pre-award and the post, like the payment and post-award is kind of where the opportunities are most ripe, I'd say, because you start getting into like the management of the award, like the middle piece, and you get very programmatic, specific, related requirements. But I think that's just based on what we've heard from recipients, right? Like I don't think it's not been like a systematic evaluation.
Let me ask the kind of the big question that I've heard from a number of recipients again about burden, and they say, let's pretend I'm a health agency or I'm a housing organization or what have you, and I get grants from several different federal agencies, and the standards you're proposing are great, but they're almost all financial and administrative. And I find it burdensome that I have to report different types of performance data to different grantors. That's a hassle.
Right.
Can you fix that for me? And so my question is not, is it fixed already? It's kind of how many years out do you imagine it might be that there would be a pilot that might say, all right, well, let's take 1 or 2 or 3 of the big grant topic areas like health or housing or water quality or something, where we might think about standardizing program outcome or performance data in a kind of a particular topic area. Is that 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Never?
I cannot answer, so I'm not going to commit to where we're at on that. But certainly, I think you could say, like, again, this is version 1.0 of the data standards, and these are more the core data elements that you need, and they are primarily financial administrative in nature, I would say. But I could see a future state where we are looking at more programmatic, specific, homeless-related programs. Let's all get together and standardize it. By the way, some of this has already happened. Some agencies have already done this among different programs, but I could see a future version of that.
So could we quote you to say agencies are welcome to take initiative?
Yes, agencies are definitely welcome to
but
take
not
initiative.
at the moment on the top of OMB's agenda, it sounds like.
Well, I think it's certainly a priority to standardize where we can, and I think we also hear a lot from the community as well. Like, let's not do standardization for standardization's sake either. Let's standardize where there's actually opportunity to reduce burden. And where we think the most tremendous low-hanging fruit, as it were to say, is that more that financial and administrative type data. And we do hear from recipients. I think State of Illinois has great stats on this, and I cannot remember exactly, but they told us the number of burden hours or labor hours associated with just even not having standardized budget categories. It was tremendous. It was crazy the amount of labor hours, and I can't remember the exact number right now, but it was, because when you think about it, as a state, they receive these funds and they're passed through entity, right? A lot of these funds go through to different subrecipients, and for all these different budget categories that different agencies require, that introduces a tremendous amount of burden. So we think that's kind of where the low-hanging fruit is right now, and where, this mantra of let's not do standardization for standardization's sake, but let's actually find the areas where we can actually improve the recipient experience. And I think programmatic will be the future, but we already have there's already so much opportunity just in the fiscal and administrative area.
Low-hanging fruit first, top of the tree next.
Yeah, if we try to tackle it all at once, I think, it can be a little overwhelming. Yeah.
Also, you have to be careful when reducing the burden, because sometimes you can take away some of the requirements so much so that you put the grantee at higher risk for non-compliance because there's little oversight. So agencies, when they're reducing the burden, you just have to be careful to make sure you aren't putting more burden on the federal staff or the contractors who have to work on it, and then the process slows, even more than it did prior to. And also, the grantee is not receiving proper technical assistance, so they're being put at risk to be non-compliant because there's little oversight. So that's just something that I think agencies should make sure they should be strategic about the approach when reducing the burden.
So I had a question about one of the human capital topics that you raised early on. REI Systems works with a number of state grant recipients and agencies and some local, and a few of them, not a majority, are starting to say, hey, maybe we need some sort of certification for our grant management employees. This world is becoming increasingly complex. They may have to be familiar with all these new standard data elements. They, of course, have to be familiar with a variety of kind of changing pieces of directive and legislation, whether it be M1824, whether it be the Potential Great Act, of course, whether it be the Data Act itself, and so forth. So my question is, do you see, again, predicting the future, which I know you don't like to do, will there be any sort of certification, or even, you think about a procurement officer, they have to be bonded. There has to be an insurance company that says, we promise and ensure that this contracting officer will not commit fraud, and if he or she does, we'll give the agency a payment, we'll pay off the bond. Do you see any sorts of kind of certification or standards or requirements for grant managers in the government in the future?
So, this is something that's been discussed a lot in the past, and I think is something explored under prior administrations. There was the Council of Financial Assistance reform that was looking at this, et cetera. And I think, one, I cannot predict the future, as you mentioned, Jeff. I will say the grants community is different than the procurement community. One, like it's really hard to certify or standardize because like you have a lot of program officers doing grants management related activities. They're not, it's not as distinctive a role as it is in procurement where you have the 1102s and then you have the program, and also they have very statutory related requirements. Is the reason that they've organized themselves that way. So I think when we were thinking about this, we thought it was more, we decided to like strategically focus on what are the skills and capabilities you need to perform certain portions of the grants management process. So like if you're a program officer, but you're also doing some of the grants management related activities, like what are the core competencies you need, et cetera. So we actually created a financial assistance career roadmap where you can check off like what your type of role is and and then it can tell you what type of core competencies that you need to complete that role. So that's actually available at cfo.gov. We also have a Grants 101 training there. So there has been a lot of focus on improving the grants management workforce, but I think it was purposely, we just said, okay, let's focus on what your role is and what are the core competencies you need rather than trying to certify all the 1102s like they do for the 1109s, 1109s.
And that's kind of what's contemplated by the workforce cap goal is that people will be properly trained to do the tasks that they need to do well.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
On behalf of REI Systems and GW, thank you very much. It was wonderful to have you here to not only share your thoughts, but also respond to questions, because that's so important to have two-way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.